I believe the Soundcraft Expression is probably the best inexpensive digital console for musical theater. I've seen a lot of reviews on this board, and I want to address some of the shortcomings of those reviews. First and foremost, I've seen reviews where people have said, well, I really do like having Submasters. Let me tell you right now, this board can have as many Submasters on as many layers as you want. That's the beauty of this board. Any fader can be configured to do anything. So it could be an input, it could be a submaster, it could be an effects master, it can be a monitor mix master, anything that you want. And that's what's great about this board. I've seen a lot of digital boards where there's an input section, and there's some kind of a split, and there's a master section. And again, maybe you don't need that many faders for a master section, so why waste all that space? That's the beauty of this board. Also, the other reviews seemed to be more of a pre-Sonus marketing campaign than a unbiased review of what digital consoles are on the market. In fact, the Expression was completely omitted from that review, the small digital console review that I saw. The Expression is around $2,500, and this is the Expression 2. This is the 24-channel model. There's a 1, which is a 16 input, and a 3, which is a 32 input. So let's talk about one of the most initially confusing things about this board is the difference between inputs, channels, and faders. So an input is a physical concept. It has to do with connections on the back of the mixer, which have, so for example, if it's a microphone input, it'll have a preamp, even though it can be used for a line input as well. Inputs can be patched to channels. Now, channels are more of a logical concept, handled by the DSP. You have mono input channels, stereo input channels. There's a certain number, I believe it's 56 mono input channels and 6 stereo input channels. And then channels are mapped to faders. So let's go through the process here. I'm pressing select here on channel 1, and then I go to my fader setup, and we see that it is set to a mono input of channel 01. Now, this is a little confusing. This really should say channel. Again, because we want to use input to refer to the physical connection, whether it be an analog input on the back of the console or a digital input if you have a MADI or a Dante card in the expansion slot. So this fader, let's go back to fader setup. I've selected layer A, slot 1. So this is 1, I'm on fader layer A. Okay. It's channel 01, which is mapped to physical input mic 01. Now, let me show you how easy it is to set up submasters on this board. You have 14 submixes or mixes. These can be used however you want. They can be used as submasters or monitor mixes. They can be pre or post fader. The matrix outputs are basically mix downs of these mixes, and I do have a good purpose for at least one matrix on this console when used in musical theater, and that's for mixing a compressed mix of the Haas mix for the backstage monitors in the dressing rooms and so forth. And then you have your effects mixes, which we'll get to later. A lot of this stuff is explained in other YouTube videos, but I'm going to show you specifically how to set these up for musical theater. Okay, the mixes 9, sorry, I bumped that. It's the only thing about this board, you just bump something, and I would recommend leaving these controls set to the filter so that they are not active, they don't do anything. You'd have to enable HPF first. That way if you bump them, you're not really going to screw anything up. Of these 14 mixes, the first 8 are mono, 9 through 14 can be stereo, but any of them can be pre or post fader. They, however, default to one or the other. So mix 1, yellow means it's pre-fader, 9 is still pre-fader, 11 is where it starts to default to post-fader, that's what green means, and then back out to our left-right mix. So let's go ahead and say we want to use mix 14 as a submix. So I'm going to name it, you hold the backspace down to clear. I'm going to call this one vocal sub. And we are going to isolate, well, I'll talk about isolation later. Let's make it a stereo mix. And all sends will be post fader, post EQ. Now we're not going to have an output patch for this, because instead it's going to be assigned to the left-right bus. Now, let's come out of it. I'm going to interrogate which channels are on the left-right bus, and we're going to take all the channels out of the left-right bus, right? Because we want to send them through Submasters first. So, nothing in the left-right bus. All right. Now we go to our mix 14. I'm just going to hold the Alt key down while pressing on, and that will put everything in at unity. Let's say these are my vocals, and I have 16 vocals. Now, an important thing to consider is the pan control here. Sorry, the pan control here. When you're out of all your mixes, only would affect the pan to the left-right bus. So if I want to pan those vocals in that submix, I need to go into that submix and do the panning here. And let's just, give a little bit of stereo separation for some of these vocalists. Let's just say they're arrayed along the stage, or just a little bit. Sometimes this also helps with comb filtering when people are singing to each other's faces and to each other's mics. And I by no means recommend this alternating pattern. I'm just screwing around right now. That was in the mix. Okay. Now, if I have all these inputs, their relative levels are mixed. Now I want this, let's say I want this fader to be my submaster. So we're going to go into fader setup with that fader selected, and we're going to say, no, this is mix 14, which is there, it is labeled vocal sub. Notice it turned green. That indicates now that this is a post fader mix master. I now have 21 faders here plus one submix. Let's go further. Let's say I want to use layer 2 for my orchestra, and that is something I recommend for musical theater. I do see some pre-configured faders on here, and we'll want to clear that out. So I'm just going to go in here and say these are unassigned for right now. Probably a quicker way to do this, but it doesn't take me very long. Okay. And I do recommend using the first layer for your vocals, second layer for your orchestra. Keep in mind that this is really an 88 fader console. It's 22 faders in 4 layers, so you're really looking at a large console in sections or pages, 22 at a time. So it's great because your booth may not have that much space for a very wide console. However, I do recommend you get the widest expression that you can fit. More faders is always better, in my opinion. And of course, the additional analog inputs will prevent you from having to go to Dante or MADI early. More about Dante in a minute. Okay, so we're gonna use this layer for our orchestra. So I would like to create another submix for the orchestra, so I can balance my vocals in my orchestra with just 2 faders. So let's use mix 13, and to call it orchestra sub. And let's also make it stereo because we'll have things like keyboards, and we'll also want to pan the instruments a little bit. Again, all sends will be post, and we're not going to be using any physical outputs because it's a submix. And we're going to put it in the left-right mix. All right, come out. So I'm on layer B. I'm going to interrogate for left-right. Again, I don't want anything going directly to left-right. It always goes through a submaster first. So we're in layer B. We're going to go to our mix 13, hold Alt key down to put these into that submix at Unity. Okay, so now let's go back to layer A. Remember I had this vocal submaster set up. Let's go ahead and set up the orchestra submaster. So go into my fader setup. I'm going to make that mix 13, which has already been renamed to orchestra sub. You may want to keep the numbers in front of your channel names just so you don't get confused. It will show you though, if you go into, it'll say I'm in mix 13 even though it's called orchestra sub, so that really helps. Alright, so now I have my orchestra sub and my vocal sub on layer A, but I can also have them on, and I should have them on my orchestra layer as well, because maybe tweaking the orchestra mix and all of a sudden I need to adjust a vocal, I can just have the same submasters in the same position on as many layers as I want. So again, I'm mapping the same channel to multiple faders. So this is going to be vocals, and that's going to be my orchestra submaster. So now, no matter which layer I'm on now, these are always my orchestra. So here, I'll show you. See, it stayed the same. These are my orchestra and vocal submasters. And I can have as many submasters as I want. Okay. So again, in this layer, I'll have my various instruments, mixed relative to each other. But again, they're all going through the orchestra submaster. Now, some of your instruments in the orchestra will be stereo, and you may not want to waste an additional fader on the left-right, because with mono input channels, while you can link them, it still takes up 2. So I'm going to show you how to link. So this is channel 23, and we're going to change it to type linked, which keeps 23 and 24 at the same level. So you really only want to grab one fader. Trying to do this, you'll get a little resistance from the other one, so just do that or this. But that's kind of a waste, right? So again, let's go into our orchestra sub. We're going to want to pan the left of the keyboard and the right of the keyboard. Maybe not as extreme as this, but definitely left and right. Just come back out. But now that we've panned them, we don't really need the second channel to be assigned to a visible fader. So let's go ahead and repurpose, let's say, channel 39 over here. Oops. Fader setup. Great. Now, we're only wasting, so to speak, one fader for one instrument. Even though it's a stereo instrument, we've cheated and only used one fader. Now that's the nice thing with the stereo inputs, of which there are only 6, unfortunately. They are purple and they are always one fader for a stereo source. The problem with the stereo inputs is they're only usable for the effects and the AES input and the 4 line inputs in the back. So I don't use them, I can't use them at all for an orchestra. Alright, so we've got our vocal layer, our orchestra layer, and now there's still layers C and D. By default, layer C is all of your mix masters, and it looks like somebody mapped a stereo input here. So let's just take that out. That's not normally layer D looks like your matrix masters. So you've got a couple of wasted layers here. I don't typically use all these mix masters here. I'm just go to the mix in question and raise or lower its master, or since I do have the masters already mapped here, they're on the board. I don't need that waste of all of these here. Now the only reason I would need that is if I did have a complicated mix down to a matrix. So I'll probably repurpose layer C for maybe my sound effects computer inputs. If I have a large show, I might need layer C for some additional microphones that I can't fit on layer A. Maybe they're just ensemble microphones that I don't need to actively mix individually. It does take, a half second to switch between layers, and that can make all the difference in the world during a show. So you do want to try to get as much as possible that you touch constantly on the first layer. So let's talk about ensemble for a second. There are some pretty neat things you can do here. Rather than waste another mix for the ensemble, let's go ahead and use one of the effects masters. So I'm going to repurpose. So that first you kind of have to cheat and figure out what they are. Alright, so FX1, if I select it, it says it's ST3, which is patched to Lex RT1, return 1. Okay, so ST3 would be the channel I have to map to the fader that I want to have on the layer. So let's come out of that. So on that fader, I'm going to go ahead and use ST3. It should turn blue, because that's an effects master. Effects 1. When we set up isolation for the cue list, and I'll show you the cue list in a minute, you'll want to assign certain vocals to the vocal sub, probably your leads, and then the ensemble to this ensemble submix / effects bus. What's cool here is that you're not wasting a mix for your ensemble. You're using one of the 4 effects mixes, and you can apply a vocal doubler to it to make your ensemble sound much bigger than it is. Okay, so we're in layer A. Let's say the last 8 are ensemble. So I want to put them in. 9. It doesn't look like I do the alt trick here. So, try that again. Really? I guess not. Alright, so who is in my ensemble mix is 9 through 16. Now let's go into our vocal mix and take these guys out. It's really weird. It might be an easy way to do it. Just turn them off. Don't worry about the levels. So actually, you probably put them all at 0. I don't know why my alt on isn't working anymore. And we'll just use the off on buttons to say who's in the mix. So. Okay. Now, in my effects, let's go in here. You can read the newer manual explains all these different effects. I was using modulated delay, but there are other delays here that might work better. With a delay time of 80 milliseconds. Just as a doubling effect. and the wet dry mix, I would put it about 20 to 25%. Because remember, these aren't also going into left right, they're going through this effects bus, and you don't want it to be 100% wet effect. So here's where you balance your effects level with the dry original signal. Okay, great. Now we've got our vocal ensemble mix, our orchestra, and our vocal leads. And again, I want to do the same thing on all my layers so that I can mix them from any layer. No, stereo input ST3, right? Oops. Shoot, did the wrong one. Select ST3. Oops, ST3. Let's just verify. Yep, return 1. So now I have, again, all my submasters on all layers. I can do the same thing on C and D if I wanted to. Now you're wondering, why is this tap light flashing? Well, that is telling me that the speed of the delay is set to that rate. The tap button gives you a quick way to adjust the speed of the delay with the beat during the music, which we wouldn't want to do with our modulated delay, because as you can see, it changes our delay time to something we don't want. We want it to stay at 80. So you have to discipline yourself to not touch the tap buttons at all, except for those channels that you really do want to be able to adjust the delay on them. All right. Cue list, extremely powerful feature for musical theater. On analog consoles, you would have to manually punch in and out mutes and levels and drive yourself crazy. It put a limit on how many mics you really could do that a human could reasonably operate, and there's no reason for that. So I'm going to go ahead and store a cue here, and we'll call this our boot up cue. It doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't actually load that cue when the console boots, but I like to have a cue for my initial setup, which I may update from time to time with all my changes. So let's talk about isolation. At the show level, you really need to isolate everything except what you want to have changed by cues. And there are only a few things: mutes and levels. So channel on and fader. Now, mixed routing level 01 is basically if I were in mix 1, the level and whether or not it's on. I am going to keep that so that it does change with cues, because the first 2 of my mixes are going to be monitor mixes to the stage, and depending on who's in ensemble for that scene and who is not, their vocals may or may not come through those speakers. In fact, I'll probably use mix 3 for the ensembles mix, and I wouldn't want their mics in their mix, so I want to isolate those as well. Now we're getting up on our mixes here. We want to isolate orchestras. That's not going to change, but 14 was our vocal mix, and again, who's in the ensemble and who's in the vocal mix will change from cue to cue. So these 2 we want to leave unisolated. I see no reason for EQ and compression and other dynamic settings for the buses to change from cue to cue. So again, pretty much isolating everything except what we want to have changed when a cue is recalled. And most importantly, the house mix, right? We're getting there. A couple more. Gotta get through the matrix here. Yeah, master, nothing changes here. We set that, and it stays the same across all cues. Very important. So you want to set up your show. I don't use graphic EQ on this board. The patching, yeah, I don't want the patching to change from cue to cue. I don't want the direct outputs to change, and I'll show you what we use direct outputs for in a minute. Yeah, so no patching. The effects, I'm going to isolate the effects because for now I don't see am I using any cues for effects, but you may want to let cues change your effect settings if you're repurposing what kind of effect is in each scene, like if you're using a different kind of reverb and who goes into it, you want to have those be programmed. And again, inserts, those aren't going to change cue to cue. Sort of a, I don't have external preamps, I'll get into that in a second. Even if I did, the gains would be not controlled by cues. So let's save the show again. This show is called Hairspray 2015. I'll save the show. The time it takes to save each show depends on how many cues you have. Okay. Look at our other settings here. You can adjust the brightness for whatever you want. So let's talk about how best to use the expansion slot in the expression. There's only two ways to go in my mind. A MADI card, which lets you buy the inexpensive Soundcraft stage box, which you can have like 16 or 24 or maybe even 32 channels with some returns. I like to call that a digital snake. The advantage of MADI is that you will be able to control the preamps on that digital snake from the board. The disadvantage is that's all you really can do with MADI. You can't easily record the show to a multi-track software such as Reaper. And you can't use MADI to send the console other audio sources digitally over a digital network. If you're really interested in digital audio networking, I would go with the Dante card. Whirlwind makes a what I call a Dante snake, the ES4TD. It's a 16 input, 8 output stage box. It's 19-inch rack mountable. And but you have to set the levels at the stage box. So what you would do is you would take the Visi Remote app on the iPad down there, pull up the input and watch the gain meters and adjust the trimmer pots on the Whirlwind at the stage level, which is fine because you're going to be down there anyways adjusting mics and talking to the orchestra. And once you do that, you shouldn't have to do that again unless someone brings their guitar amp, takes it and brings it back, and they've messed all the levels up, and then you would cover all that during the sound check. You'll still see the levels here. You just the gain knob won't do anything on a Dante snake until that standard is better embraced by all manufacturers. I believe the protocol supports it, but so far manufacturers have only been providing remote preamp gain control for their own brand of products, and usually over their own protocols, such as Soundcraft's MADI. What's great about Dante is the Soundcraft Expression can connect to 64 channels of that Dante network. And so you've got your stage 16 plus 8, so you've got 24 for your stage snake. And then you've got the other 40 channels for things like maybe you've got sound effects computers, QLab or ShowQ system. Maybe you have a video projection computer that has some sound that needs to come in. You can do that all over, gigabit Ethernet without having to run audio cables everywhere, without using your precious analog inputs for things like that. Your analog inputs, really all you need those for are your wireless microphone receivers or any cabled or wired mics. There are a lot of manufacturers that are starting to put Dante into their wireless mic receivers, but that's typically on the high end. It's very expensive. So here's an example. This board is 2500. either the MADI or the Dante card are somewhere between $400 and $700. A 16 by 8 MADI snake is maybe around $1,000. A 16 by 8 Dante snake is around $2,300. So the Dante is a little bit more expensive, but boom, it's much more scalable. Now I've basically increased the number of channels that I can get into my board from computers, and most importantly, the ability to record the entire show to multi-track software. So how do we set that up? Well, since I'm not going to go through the Dante screens on this video, but I will do that on another video. But you do need to set your direct outs on all of your analog inputs. So you'd go here to your Dante card, and I would map the direct out of channel 1 to Dante 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, 4 to 4, and so on and so forth. All right, let's talk about compression. That's one of the major reasons for moving to a digital board, is to eliminate all this outboard gear that you might have had to hook up through inserts and so forth. Really just this one compact unit that does everything. So let's go to our vocals. I recommend you always use compression on vocals. Here's the problem. You've got your orchestra has a certain minimum level that you need, with the natural sound of the orchestra unamplified, plus some additional mic'd instruments so you can hear all of the orchestra, not just the loudest instruments like the horns and the drums. That would sound horrible. So you have a minimum sound level that's already been used by your orchestra. And then from here to the threshold of pain, or comfort, let's just say, you have some headroom for your vocals. The vocals need to be heard over the orchestra, but they cannot be so loud that they are uncomfortably loud. So you need to squeeze the vocals into this amount of headroom here, and you do that with compression. Compression also prevents when people are singing and they have a lot of dynamics, from very quiet to suddenly screaming, that you don't blow your audience's ears out when the singer is hitting the loud note. I think it's impossible to try to ride faders on a performer and sit here and try to do this. You're never going to be fast enough. You can try it, but not when you're managing 16 or 24 microphones. Forget it. Compression is a must. That's just my belief. So on mic 1, let's go ahead and enable compression. I recommend that the ratio be set to about 3. You can play with this. Attack should be immediate, 0. 0.3 I guess is the minimum. A release, I don't really care. 80 milliseconds sounds fine. And your threshold is the point at which compression starts to kick in. It's the knee or rotation point where the compression starts to slow down the increase in gain. And I'll show you some of that on some little graphs. So I would start with minus 30 or 24, 25. And you can play with this during your tech week. You would ideally set the threshold so that the compression starts kicking in when the vocalist is starting to get louder, so that the compression ratio starts kicking in and slowing down the increasing amount of amplification. Too high a compression ratio, and the overall sound level from the vocalist will appear to actually decrease as they get louder, which is distracting. Too little, and they're getting uncomfortably loud. So you want to play with the ratio and the threshold. And what's nice is once you set them, you could copy and paste them with this Soundcraft Expression just by holding down the compression section, and then I'm going to hold this button down and press select on all the channels I want to copy to, and I've just set my compression up for all my channels. These are all set the same. EQ, I don't need to explain that. I hear a lot of bitching that, oh my gosh, the Expression doesn't have the fully parametric. It's only fully parametric on 2 bands. Well, okay, this has never been a problem. In fact, in some cases, I really want to have a high shelf or a low shelf, and I really have never needed more than a couple of tweaks to the vocals. With adjustable bandwidth and frequency, it's really never been a problem. So let's look at equalization on it. Of course, this is something you want to do with an actor singing. Being able to adjust the amount of bandwidth where the boost or cut is. What I like to do is boost to find the annoying portion of their voice and then bring it down. Now, if you find yourself doing the exact same bands on every person, then you've got a house tuning issue. Either your speakers have a setting like for example, the JBL line arrays have an ACS or amplitude shading control that can push out a lot of highs. You can play with that. I recommend getting a DBX Drive Rack PA2 and letting it tune the system for you with the calibrated microphone. Also try using if you're using Countryman head mics, try using different caps. Going to a flat cap or a crisp cap to change the response. Some actors may require different caps because of just the nature of their voice. Also, make sure you're positioning the microphone in the sweet spot on their face so that you get the best sound. Alright, so we've configured our isolation. Pretty much everything's isolated. And what I recommend you do before each show is what I call a mic plan. And it's a grid of scenes and mics going across and whose needs to be on in which scene. And then you take that sheet. So that's after you have reviewed the script. You take that sheet over the board and you program in all those scenes as cues. So as a board op, you're just hitting the next button. So let's record another cue here. And who's on stage and whose mics are up is taken care of for you. If you don't want them to come on suddenly, since your Submaster is isolated, at the end of a song, you can bring it down, then fade them up. So sometimes I rarely have to do that because there's often a lot of applause at the end of a song that would cover any slightest sound of additional mics coming on. Really haven't had to do that too much. Another thing I like to do is, so what's nice here about having the vocals on a separate ensemble submix is it's really easy to blend the foreground and background here along with the orchestra's level. And at the end of a song, I might want to push the orchestra to get that big finale sound. Those are all things that you develop by playing around with them on your own. The gate, typically used for drums, not vocals. Now, we're going to come to the most important part for me for vocals is delay. Now, most theaters, the sound system, the speakers are far down stage of the onstage action. And if you go to a show and you close your eyes and you ask your brain, where is the singing coming from? It should say on stage. It should say right where they are on stage. If it says it sounds like people are singing from plastic boxes in the ceiling, then the sound person has not used delay correctly. This is really important. It has to do with the Haas effect or the Precedence effect. The idea is that it takes time for sound to reach us from the vocalist, and the brain assigns the location of the person based on where it first hears the sound from. So if you have your performer, and then you have your speakers, and then you have your audience, the speakers are closer, so there's no delay set up between the performer's mic and the speakers. The audience will think this is the source of the sound. You want them to think this is the source. So you put in a delay equal to the amount of distance, at least the amount of distance, but no more than 30 milliseconds greater than the distance between the performer and the speakers. And I would do the greatest distance. The brain, after 30 milliseconds, starts to hear an echo. So you have a 30 millisecond tolerance there for excessive delay, so to speak. Okay, so what's great about this board is it'll give you that measurement in feet. So on mic 1, And I'm going to go ahead and adjust the delay. All right, here it gives me the delay in feet. I want to set the delay here, let's say for 30 feet. So what I would do is I would actually measure the distance from the speakers to the furthest upstage point that the actors will be speaking or singing from, and use that as your delay setting. 30 feet, 5 inches, that's fine. And now we want to use copy and paste to apply that to all of our vocal mics. So I'm going to hold down just that section there. Maybe not. No. Okay. Looks like it did it. Hold this. Again, pasting into all my... So let's take a look here. You saw the EQ change. That's because we didn't copy and paste the EQ settings. We would never want to do that. So that's why you always want to, when you go into copy paste, you want to hold down just the section you want to copy, right? If you don't, you get everything, and you don't want that. Okay, so it looks like the delay copied across all our channels here, except this one, which I don't think I pasted it to. And that is really important. That precedence effect makes a big difference. All right, let's talk about how to set up Matrix 1. Well, let's talk about monitor mixes. Okay, so I was going to use Mix 1 for, this will be downstage monitors. For this show, I'm going to try the K-Array CAN 200 Anacondas, which are very, very tiny speakers that go along in a giant line array. Again, you want to talk to the music director and the performer and say, what do you need to hear? Well, they probably need to hear the keyboard and themselves. So now I would do monitor mixes pre-fader, because I'll tell you why in a second. So let's go ahead and we'll just set everything up first. Just say the leads in this queue are 1 through 8. And then they might need to hear some keyboards, right? So we'll bring in some keyboards. Then over here is my master level. In some shows, I've needed to kill the monitors during non-singing scenes so that we avoid hearing the spill from them. So I would assign this master to layer A as well, so I can quickly adjust it. Let's do that. Then what you can do is, during the show, simply mute that those monitor speakers. You could even program that into a queue if you wanted to. It's just better just to bring it down. You don't want it to be a sudden pop-off. Okay, why pre-fader? Let's talk about that. If I were to do monitor mixes post-fader, I would sort of be working against myself. By leaving them pre-fader, some of the mixing work will be done by the performers because they're hearing their own levels from the monitors, so they may lower their or raise their own voices in relative level to the other microphones that they're hearing come through those monitors. Post fader, I would limit to the submixes, of course, but let's say you want to send a vocal mix to the band, and I would do that first of all. Let's call it. We want it to be post fader. Output 4 is fine. You can, by making them post fader for the orchestra, as I'm mixing relative levels, they're getting the benefit of that adjusted mix. However, if I were to do the monitor mix for the actors as post fader, every time I adjust them down, they'll sing louder, or if I bring them up, they'll sing softer. I don't want them to be fighting me on the mix down of the vocals. So leave the monitors for those performers that you want to sort of auto level themselves to pre-fader. So the orchestra is post-fader. Another thing we want to do on the orchestra mix is compress it a little bit more, even as the vocals are compressed. So I'm selecting the master for that, and I'm going to put on some compression. We're going to set a harsher ratio, but a higher threshold. The idea is to prevent the orchestra from being overwhelmed by any extremely loud vocals. Now I want to talk about gain. This is important, and I forgot to set it up on my inputs. When you compress, you're bringing down the overall dynamic range of the vocals, but you may also need to have a minimum level, and you could think of the gain as the minimum level. It's makeup gain for the fact that you're compressing. You could add in 5 to 10 dB here, and you'll find that you're getting some gain back on your faders. Something again you'll want to play with during the show. So now we are sending a compressed post-fader mix of vocals to the orchestra. We have a pre-fader mix of vocals for the vocalists. Let's talk about a feed for Backstage. And really, it just needs to be whatever the audience is hearing, right? So when you go to Matrix 1, by default, there's 2 pages. There's where you are, and then there's a second page that's always your left and right, and your mono mixes. You really just need to have the left and right going in there with compression. Again, harsh compression on this. Immediate attack. Threshold could be lower, again, because those Backstage monitor speakers are in the ceiling. They're tiny little 70 volt. They don't have a lot of dynamic range. You want to have a consistent level, so you'll want to play with that. And then, of course, that would need to get patched to an output. So Matrix 1, you can certainly patch it to one of our mix outputs, because we're not using the outputs of any of these. We're just going to the left-right bus as Submasters, so those physical outputs are available. Alright, so now we have set up a Backstage mix. It's just a compressed mix of the house, which should be fine. I haven't had any complaints about that. Alright, the one thing about the Expression is it does only have one expansion slot. The Performer has 2. The Performer also has VCAs or DCAs, which might be nice. What it is it's you assign one of these as a DCA, let's say, but it will actually affect the relative setting of the faders in that group, right? I thought about that would be nice for mixing the different octaves of vocal talent, like baritone, bass, tenor, soprano, blah blah blah. It's an easy way to do balancing. I haven't really thought of any other use for those. The Performer is also an LCR console. It's got left, center, right, true panning, where you have a three channel house system, and when a channel is only in center, it only comes out of the center stack, and when you move it to left, it's between left and center, and from center to right, it's this console has a mono output, but the panning only works across the stereo output. The mono output is just always what's going on. So this board is not suitable for a theater that has a 3-stack house system with a center vocal speaker. The other thing the Performer offers is digital scribble strips. I'm not sure how legible they are in darkness. I'm sure they're better than using tape, but I still like using tape, different colored tape, to mark my console. And I'm sure I'm missing something. I did mention the 2 slots. The idea there would be is you can put both a MADI and a Dante card in. Then you get the best of both worlds. You get your ability to record and have computers hooked in through Dante, and you can control your stage boxes with remote preamp gain control through MADI, and they're a little bit less expensive. So that's another advantage there. Also, I do believe, for those people whining about it, the ability to do fully parametric on these two bands is on the Performer as well.